to find common ground by collaborating and working towards bringing better technology solutions, innovative products to the world.
Show investors or customer have marketing and commercializing their invention products in the market.
As large gatherings are no longer encouraged, I'm happy to see that MTE has gone virtual. This will allow more innovators to promote their innovation and share their ideas with the world.
It has been nurturing the innovation culture among scientists, researchers, students, and startup founders in order for them to transform their ideas into business ventures.
There may come a day in the near future when we have overcome this crisis, but our innovations may be able to assist another country in their fight against the pandemic.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be invited by the organizers, Protem Group and UITM to say a few words of encouragement and congratulate all the participants of the Malaysia Technology Expo 2021 Sustainable Development Goals International Innovation Award. SDGs is about making the world a better and safer place for all, leaving no one behind. So I hope you will always innovate with sustainable development as the end goal and contribute towards ending poverty, protecting the planet, and ensure that by 2030 all people enjoy peace and prosperity.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to MTE 2022 Virtual. Do enjoy our next knowledge sharing session.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good day to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer of 2022 Malaysian Technology Expo for inviting me to provide a knowledge sharing session. My name is Prof. Dr. Muhammad Yusuf bin Alias from Multimedia University, and today I'll be sharing with you on the topic of the future of mobile communication towards 5G and beyond. Telecommunication has been a very important part in our daily life, especially during this pandemic. Since the early 2020, telecommunication has become more and more important as we are using telecommunication, for example, to scan MySejahtera, to communicate for contact tracing, for example, and we're having online learning for our kids and our students. So we have been using telecommunication, and of course when we're traveling, we're using telecommunication as part of the way to find our path to our destination. And we also use telecommunication as part of our working life. We have been working from home, and it has become a new norm for today's life. And then we are also embarking towards online shopping. We have e-wallet and things like that, which actually requires good telecommunication services. So we have seen that telecommunication has been an essential part of our life, and we really need telecommunication in our daily routine. So telecommunication actually is a very wide area, and it can be divided into two main parts. One is a wired type of telecommunication, and the second part is on the wireless type of telecommunication. Of course, even for wireless telecommunication, there are many categories of wireless communication. For example, the smallest area that you have is called the wireless personal area network. These are the things that you use for your own personal things. For example, Bluetooth connection like the Bluetooth headsets, Bluetooth speakers, Bluetooth mouse, and so on. So these are considered as a personal area network. Slightly bigger area, we called it a wireless local area network, and this is the Wi-Fi that we have been using. So Wi-Fi is an important part of our life now, because we have Wi-Fi at home, we have Wi-Fi in the office, and we have Wi-Fi's everywhere. So Wi-Fi is part of the wireless local area network standard, and it is considered as a small area, slightly bigger than the personal area network, but is still considered as small. As we go into a much bigger area, there is another wireless technology, which is a wireless metropolitan area network. And this is covering, for example, in a campus or in a city area. We used to have WiMAX, but of course WiMAX is already outdated. So there are some other technologies for this wireless metropolitan area network. And going into a much bigger area, we can consider the wireless wide area network. So this wireless wide area network, for example, it can cover the whole country, or it can cover a very much bigger area compared to the wireless metropolitan area network, local area network, or personal area network. One of the most important technology in this wireless wide area network is the mobile technology that we are using every day. So why are we looking into wireless communication? Why aren't we looking at wired communication? Wireless communication has becoming an essential part for the user end, where we prefer something without cables. We want to be free from being connected to cables. So that's why we are moving towards wireless communication. So why am I touching about wireless mobile communication? Based on the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, ICT Facts and Figures 2021, which can be downloaded from the International Telecommunication Union website. For the global ICT development, starting from 2005 to 2021, we can see that the trend is that there are more mobile users, especially active mobile broadband subscription over the past few years. So you can see that the increase of the numbers of mobile cellular telephone subscriptions has been increased worldwide, as compared to, for example, fixed broadband subscription, which can be considered flatter compared to the active mobile broadband subscription. And of course, less and less people are using fixed telephone now, so you can see that the fixed telephone subscriptions is going down. In fact, the number of mobile subscribers is actually more than 100%. So for example, per 100 inhabitants, there are actually more than 100 number of mobile subscribers, which means that there is more than one subscription for each user, right? What this shows is that the number of mobile subscribers is getting more and more over the years, and this trend is in the increasing trend. So we will see there will be more subscribers, especially in terms of the mobile broadband. However, if we look at the gap between the developed and the developing countries, we can see that there is still a huge gap in terms of the mobile development, especially in the developed and developing countries. And you can see that the gap is getting bigger and bigger over the years. So this is something that we have to look into, especially when we're talking about social relationship, the digital divide research, and so on. So this shows that the technology is not only moving very fast, but it's also introducing a much bigger gap between the different categories of countries. In Malaysia itself, for example, this is the based on the report that was given by MCMC for the third quarter of 2021. There are 100 27.4% of number of mobile broadband, and among them there are 142.1% of mobile cellular, where this is based on 100 users. So what it means that for each 100 user in Malaysia, there are actually 142.1 subscription for the cellular services. This is not surprising because I think most of us actually have more than one services. For example, we subscribe to more than one company for our mobile service. And overall, in the whole Malaysia itself, although Malaysia population is roughly around 30 to 32 million, there are about 41.6 million number of mobile broadband subscriptions in Malaysia back in the third quarter of 2021. As compared to our fixed broadband, which is only about 3.5 million number of subscriptions, there is a huge number that of people that are subscribing towards the mobile broadband. So what this means is that mobile broadband is getting more and more popular, and a lot more users are using the mobile broadband services as compared to the fixed broadband. So that's why we are going to look into the evolution or the development of mobile technology, especially not just in Malaysia, but also worldwide. Probably you have heard about 5G or the fifth generation. So the G in 5G stands for fifth generation. But of course, before there is a fifth generation, there is definitely the 1G until 4G. So the history of mobile communication actually started with the first generation. Even before the first generation, there was already mobile services, but it is not the cellular that as we know today. So the actual cellular communication as what we know today actually started from the first generation, which begins around 1980s. And the unique feature of this first generation is basically using analog communication. And of course, at that time, the main services that was given by the first generation is only for voice services. Then during this 1980s, there was a revolution of digitalization. So everything becomes digital. Even mobile communication is moving towards digital. So that's where we have the second generation cellular, which is a move from the analog communication in the first generation to the digital communication in the second generation. But the feature of the services that is given in the second generation is still mainly on voice. But of course, there are some added services such as the SMS was introduced in the second generation, the short messaging system. And there was, like for example, caller ID, call forwarding, and so on, that was introduced as an extra service to the second generation. Right? But the second generation is still mainly for voice. Then in the mid of 1990s, when there was internet that started to become public, so people are demanding for a higher amount of data that can be used in mobile communication, because the second generation was mainly for voice, so it can only carry about 9.6 kilobits per second, which is not sufficient for most of the internet services. So that's why there was an introduction of the third generation, which basically is trying to cope with the increased demand in data in terms of higher data rate for internet users using mobile communication. So that's why there was an introduction of 3G. But 3G actually has two main switches, which is the circuit switch for voice and also the packet switch for data. But around that time, right, when the internet started to boom, and then there was the introduction of smartphone, where people are using a lot more apps and there is a high demand of data. That's why the movement or the technology moved from the third generation to the fourth generation, which is to support for the mobile broadband. So this time it already shifted from the voice type of services towards more of data type of services. How many of us actually use mobile phone for voice calls anymore these days? And voice have also been transferred instead of the circuit switch it moved towards what we call an all IP network or packet switching. So even for the fourth generation, voice are being carried over in packet switching using what we call VoLTE, VoLTE. So it's voice over LTE, which is very similar to voice over IP. So the fifth generation that everybody is talking about now is basically to increase the data rate, the amount of data that can be carried over. And you can see that the movement from every generation is roughly around 10 years. And basically behind me for 5G is about 2020. So it was introduced around 2020. So the change from one generation to the other generation takes around 10 years. So why is this important? Because we want to see what is there beyond 5G and why is 5G very important. So the promise of 5G, everybody talks about 5G. So what is so special about 5G? So the difference between 5G and 4G is that both are actually carrying a very high amount of data. But the special thing about 5G is that there are three main features in 5G that was not there in 4G. So 4G was mainly for data, and it was for increasing the amount of data rate. Excuse me. But for 5G, there are more than just data rate. So there are two more features that was an addition in 5G, which is the massive machine type communication or MMTC, and the ultra reliable and low latency communication or URLLC. So these three key features, which include the enhanced mobile broadband EMBB, are the main key features for 5G, or the main key things that we need to know about 5G. What are these three things? Basically, the EMBB is talking about a high data rate. So it's talking about something that is more than 10 gigabits per second peak data rate that can be used for downloading anything to the mobile broadband. Then it's also talking about MMTC, the massive machine type communication, where this is talking about a huge number of devices being connected at one time, and they're talking about 1 million devices per kilometer square. If you have heard about Internet of Things or IoT, so MMTC is directly related to IoT. Then the third feature of 5G is on the ultra reliable and low latency communication. So this is talking about a very small delay or small latency, and the latency is about less than 1 millisecond radio latency. Later on, we will see that what are the user scenarios or the use case scenarios for each of these three key features. Right? The other relationship of 5G is due to the fourth industrial revolution that we have right now. So back to the industrial revolution, starting from the first industrial revolution, where it's talking about steam-based machines. Now, back in the 1700s, so this is where the production becomes more and more by going from the manual machine towards the steam-based machine. Then in the 1800s, there was a second revolution where instead of using the steam-based machine, it is moved towards the energy-based mass production, where they use electricity to power up the machines rather than using steam-based machines. Then the third industrial revolution, which happens around 1960s, is where the machines are now become computer-based and internet-based. So everything is still being powered by electrical, but the control is done using a computerized and internet-based machines rather than manually by human beings. And now we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, where it's talking about intelligent-based business models. And what does this has to do with 5G? Actually, 5G is also part of the fourth industrial revolution, or the drivers, one of the drivers to push for this fourth industrial revolution. So among other things, there are a few technologies that we have seen, or we probably will be reading in the news or in the research. People are talking about big data. So there's a huge amount of data. It's a data-driven technology or a data-driven community where everything is about data. So big data plays an important role or is also part of this fourth industrial revolution, right? Other than big data, we also have what is called the artificial intelligence, right? Everything is running in machine based, and there is a machine to machine communication and so on. So there is artificial intelligence is being introduced in the industries to operate the machines and also to do most of the work that we are doing today. And also the third types of technology that has been part of the enhancement or part of the technology is pushing towards the industry is in terms of cloud. There can be cloud computing, cloud storage, or even cloud radio access network for 5G. And in order to communicate or in order to relate all these types of new technologies, we need something a very high connectivity. So we won't be able to have big data or artificial intelligence or cloud computing or cloud processing on its own. So all this will be linked together by using hyperconnectivity. So connectivity is a very important part. So this is where telecommunication comes in and plays an important role to link between the different technologies together. So this is where 5G is coming, where 5G is part of this connectivity that will connect between the big data, AI, and also cloud. Right? So connectivity is in this case plays the link where it becomes the link between the different technologies to put together all these different technologies. The summary of 5G use cases is shown here, and as can be seen over here, so we can see that the three features that I mentioned earlier. We have the enhanced mobile broadband, which is EMBB. Then we have the massive machine type communication, MMTC, and we also have the ultra reliable and low latency or URLLC. So each of these three key features actually is related to a certain use cases depending on the type of use cases that you need, right? And even the use cases can also be divided into three different types of use cases. One is a human to human. We have the human to machine, and then we also have machine to machine type of communication, right? So for example, the different currently we have applications such as virtual reality and augmented reality, which require a high amount of data rate. So this is part of the enhanced mobile broadband. Same with what we are using today a lot, especially during this pandemic and during the movement control order, which is video calling, virtual meeting, virtual conference like the MTE that we have this year, and so on. So this require for an enhanced mobile broadband, which is a high data rate, right? And it can be between human to human or even human to machine, right? For example, you can have the augmented reality or virtual reality. And then we also have, for example, machine to machine like CCTVs, mobile cloud computing, and so on, which is basically the connection between a machine to another machine. So it's a communication between machine to machine. In terms of the massive machine type communication, you can also relate this to Internet of Things, where it can be part of the wearable communication, social networking, healthcare monitoring, smart homes, smart cities, vehicle to infrastructure communication, and also part of the industrial automation. And the third feature of 5G, which is related to the ultra reliable and low latency communication. So this can be for example, it can be used for something that requires a small amount of delay. The best example for the URLLC is probably the autonomous car, where we're talking about the vehicle-to-vehicle communication or vehicle-to-pedestrian, which requires a high response or a very fast response. Also, it's important, especially in remote surgery, where a small delay can actually bring very bad consequences, right, in terms of public safety and also part of the industrial automation. So we have been talking about 5G, but the topic that I'm going to actually be sharing today is more towards what happened after 5G. So there is something that we are talking in research. We call it beyond 5G and 6G. Probably most of you will be saying, oh, well, we still have not got 5G. Why do you need to think about 6G? Right? So if you look at history, the number of years that it takes to go from one generation to another generation is roughly around 10 years. So that's the amount of time it takes for one technology to be matured enough to be used by the public, or it's being adopted widely by the public. Just look at how 4G is currently being used. It's still not widely used, although it has been introduced in around 2010. Even 3G last time takes about more than 10 years to be adopted. So the technology itself will take a few years, right? In terms of research, the standardization, the amount of work that needs to be done in order to come up with a firm standard will also take some time. So it is not an overnight kind of thing. So that's why whatever that is happening now, for example, the beyond 5G or 6G research that is going now, they're not thinking about what we're going to be used tomorrow or day after tomorrow or next year. But what it is about is a planning for 2030 onwards. So whatever technology that is currently being researched about for beyond 5G and 6G is something for the usage of between 2030 to 2040. So it's not something to be used between 2020 to 2030, right? And there is also in between in order to catch for the next generation, because it takes some time. It takes about 10 years to go from one generation to another. Most of the time in between, we have a half generation. For example, between 2G to 3G, there was a 2.5G introducing GPRS and Edge. Between 3G to 4G, there was 3.5G introducing, for example, HSPA and HSPA Plus, and so on. And then there is also 4.5G before the introduction of 5G. All this in the middle type of generations, and not really a totally new generations. It's just an add-on to the whatever that is existing standards. So why is it called beyond 5G, or why is it called 6G? Why isn't it called 6G yet? So because the 6G, the term 6G has not been formalized, it's not being standardized yet. So when they are talking about beyond 5G, it can be an enhancement to the current 5G system. So that's why it's said to be, maybe it's a 5.5G, for example. So it's a beyond 5G rather than at the 6G level. And normally, to go from one generation to another generation, there is a catalyst. There is something that sparks the generation itself. For example, from first generation to the second generation, there was the digitalization that sparked going from first generation to second generation. From second generation to third generation, there was an internet in the middle that actually sparked that movement towards third generation. And then from third generation to fourth generation, there is the smartphone that actually sparked the movement from third generation to fourth generation. And from fourth generation to fifth generation, there is the IoT and also the autonomous cars and so on that actually spark for the usage of fifth generation. So what is it that going to spark the sixth generation? We'll never know, right? And then it may come in another 2 or 3 years. There may be some applications that will spark towards the introduction of the sixth generation. So in terms of the standardization, there is already an ongoing process, right, under the International Telecommunication Union and the 3GPP group that is responsible for the fourth generation and the fifth generation. They already started thinking of, or is already in the plan of releasing the different standards for beyond 5G and also towards 6G. As I mentioned in the earlier slide, is going to be looking into the year 2030, for example. So you can see that the planning is already there, and although we don't have 5G yet in place, but people already started the planning for sixth generation. So what are some of the examples of these beyond 5G services that we can use later on? So beyond 5G is looking for applications such as solving social problems like the remote surgery, which is still in the study phases, communication between humans and things, humans and machines, right? Including AI, for example. This is also the beyond 5G services that is being looked into. There is also an expansion of communication environment. If right now we're talking about a fixed base stations or something that is not moving. In the sixth generation, talking about drones being base stations, for example. So the drones can be becoming an ad hoc network. And we are also talking about sophistication of cyber and physical fusion. So this is more of the man and machines, again, the communication between man and machine. These are some of the example technologies that are currently being in work. There is, for example, looking into the ultra fast and large capacity. For frequency band, for example, if 5G is looking into the millimeter wave, the 6G or beyond 5G and 6G is looking up to even a much higher frequency, for example, into terahertz, and a much smaller wave in the higher bands. So the high frequency bands such as the terawaves and millimeter wave, which are still unexploited in terms of radio communication, has a much bigger bandwidth that can support the higher data rate. It's also looking at the ultra low latency, going for a much shorter delay, ultra numerous connectivity, multiple simultaneous connection, looking at ultra low power consumption to preserve energy, and ultra security and resiliency. So in conclusion, we are basically still in the early stages of the rollout of 5G, and there is still a long way to go if you look at how the development, how the application and the implementation of 5G, there is still a long way to go. But not to worry, because basically technology, the mobile communication will take some time before it's being adopted or before it's become a normal usage among the normal users. So it will take some time. If you look in history for the second generation, third generation, fourth generation, it has already shown that it will take at least 4 to 5 years before it becomes something that is common among the users. So right now is the right time to be asking what is next, and the path ahead of us appears to be rich, because the connectivity is very important. And as we see that with the pandemics and so on, the future is changing. Everything becomes new normal, and communication is an essential part of our daily life. So 5G is not only opening the door for more and more applications, but it's also opening the door to emerging use cases, especially for beyond 5G and also towards 6G. So extreme requirements will continue to push the evolution of wireless communication well beyond 5G, and in time will enable a new service experience to all of us. So with that, I would like to conclude my sharing this morning, today. So I hope you have actually gained some knowledge from this sharing. If you want to visit our website, you can visit our faculty website, Faculty of Engineering at Multimedia University. We are running a few research in beyond 5G and also towards 6G, for example, in terms of the intelligent reflective surfaces, in terms of machine learning and deep learning in communications, and many more. So hopefully this is very helpful to you. Thank you very much for your time, and hope to see you in the future.